Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going on a deep dive into the Millionaire Next Door. Have you heard of it?
Oh, absolutely. A classic.
It's a fascinating book because it really challenges a lot of our assumptions about, well, millionaires.
Right.
It turns out that those stereotypical images we have of millionaires, living these lavish lifestyle, it's often not the reality.
It's true. So many of them fly under the radar, living surprisingly normal lives.
Exactly. They're living right next door, blending right in. So it really makes you wonder, what are they doing differently?
Right. What's the secret sauce?
Well, the book breaks down 7 common factors found among these wealth builders. And get this, a whopping 80% of them are first-generation rich, meaning they built their fortunes from the ground up. No trust funds here.
Exactly. It really emphasizes that achieving wealth is more about making smart choices and having disciplined habits rather than just luck or inheritance.
It's about playing the long game, right? Building that solid foundation.
Abs-
And speaking of foundations, the book stresses net worth as the real measure of wealth, not just your income.
Makes sense. It's not about how much you earn, it's about what you keep.
Right. It's understanding the difference between what they call cattle, which are things you own that increase in value over time, think investments or a business, versus chattel. Those are possessions like fancy cars or designer clothes that actually lose value over time.
Right. Like they say, the rich don't buy assets, they buy things that buy assets.
Exactly. And the book does a great job of illustrating this with some compelling examples. Take Charles Bobbins, for instance. He's a fireman, modest income,
Okay.
but an impressive net worth. He and his wife, a secretary, they live well below their means, prioritize saving and investing wisely.
Smart. Playing the long game.
Exactly. Then you have someone like Dr. Ashton, a high-income earner, technically a millionaire on paper, but he's constantly living on the edge. See, despite his large salary, his lavish spending habits actually ate away at his wealth, making him less financially secure than our frugal fireman, Charles.
It's a classic case of how a high income doesn't always equal wealth if you're not careful. It's about having a plan and sticking to it.
It all comes down to making conscious choices about your spending, no matter how much you earn, aligning your lifestyle with your long-term goals and not just chasing those short-term thrills.
Couldn't agree more. It's about building a secure future.
And that brings us to one of the book's most powerful messages, I think, the whole idea of frugality. You see, it turns out that a lot of these millionaires, they don't feel the need to flaunt their wealth at all.
Right. It's not about status or keeping up with the Joneses.
Exactly. In fact, they often live surprisingly modest lifestyles.
They do. The book even tells this funny story about Johnny Lucas, this millionaire who goes on a TV show. And when they ask him about how much he spends on suits, well, he shocks everyone by saying he's never spent more than $399 on one.
Wow, that really makes you think, huh?
It does. Like, are we missing the point somewhere?
Right. And it's not just him. The book found that 50%, half of the millionaires they surveyed, had spent less than $399 on their most expensive suit. So maybe that whole idea of designer labels and all that, maybe it's not really what it's about.
It's about value, right?
Yeah.
Making smart choices.
Exactly. And this frugality, it goes beyond just clothing. The book talks about how there's a surprisingly high concentration of millionaires in professions like, auctioneering.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Right. But it makes sense when you think about it. These are people who really understand value.
Yeah. They're negotiating. They're thinking about the best deals.
Exactly. And that discipline, that thinking about spending wisely, it carries over into their personal lives too.
They're not just being cheap. They're being intentional.
Exactly. They're playing the long game.
And that brings us to, I think, another really important point the book makes, this idea of the income tax trap.
The what trap?
The income tax trap.
Yeah.
See, a lot of people think that, a high income, it automatically equals wealth, right?
Yeah, it seems logical.
It does. But the book, it points out this thing that we often overlook. High earners, they often end up paying a huge chunk of their income in taxes.
Oh, right. And that eats into their ability to build wealth over time.
Exactly. And this is where that idea of realizing income comes in. Millionaires, they often focus on building those assets that appreciate over time, and they generate income that isn't taxed as high as, say, regular salary.
Ah, so they're playing a different kind of game strategically.
Exactly. And the book uses these two women, Sharon and Barbara. Similar incomes, but wildly different net worths. Sharon, she earns a lot, but because of taxes and not really planning, she hasn't built up much wealth.
And Barbara?
Well, Barbara has been really disciplined, budgeting, planning, investing,
Yeah.
and her net worth. way higher than Sharon's.
It shows you the power of being proactive with your money, right? Making it work for you.
Absolutely. And speaking of different approaches to money, the book also talks about this really interesting distinction between under-accumulators of wealth, or UAWs, and prodigious accumulators of wealth, the PAWs.
Okay, UAWs and pause. So who are they?
It's all about mindset and habits, really. The book talks about this guy, Teddy Friend. He earns a good living, but he struggles to actually accumulate wealth, and it all goes back to some overspending habits he picked up early on, from his family.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like we inherit not just genes, but money mindsets from our families.
Totally. And it can be hard to break free from those patterns. But the book says it's possible. They suggest things like, tracking your spending, making a budget, maybe even talking to a financial advisor.
It's like taking control of your money story, really.
Exactly. Rewriting the script.
It really is about being mindful and intentional with your finances. And speaking of intentionality, the book also dives into this whole other topic, something that I think can be kind of, I don't know, a sensitive subject maybe, intergenerational wealth transfer.
Oh, yeah, giving money to your kids.
Right. Specifically, it talks about, maybe some of the downsides of giving your kids large sums of money. Like, could it actually backfire?
It's interesting, right? Because we want to help our kids set them up for success.
Of course.
But the book, it introduces this term, economic outpatient care, or EOC.
EOC.
Yeah, basically it's when adult children, they keep relying on their parents for financial support. And the book argues that it can actually hurt them in the long run, make it harder for them to become truly financially independent.
It's like that saying, right? Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Exactly. But in this case, it's more like, give your kid a bunch of money, and are you really setting them up for success, or are you maybe creating a cycle of dependency? The book actually tells this story about this couple, Lamar and Mary. They're living way beyond their means. And it's only possible because their parents are constantly bailing them out.
Wow, so their parents' generosity is actually kind of enabling some not-so-great habits.
Right. And it's not that parents shouldn't help their kids at all, but the book really encourages us to think about the how. Like, are we helping them build a solid foundation, or are we kind of fostering this sense of entitlement?
It's a tough line to walk, for sure. There's this one quote from the book that really resonated with me. It said, "It is much easier to spend other people's money than dollars that are self-generated." And it just made me wonder, sometimes when we try to shield our kids from financial struggles, are we really doing them any favors?
It's true. Those experiences, they can be tough, but they teach us valuable lessons about managing money, being responsible.
Exactly. So if we want to raise financially responsible kids, what can we do?
Well, the book actually gives 7 pretty practical tips. Like, one of them is don't even tell your kids how much money you have.
Really?
Yeah. It's about keeping the focus on the values, on working hard, not on some inheritance they might get someday.
That's interesting. Kind of takes the silver spoon out of the equation.
Exactly. And then there are things like, encouraging them to get jobs early on, manage their own money, even if it's just a small allowance.
Teaching them by doing, right?
Right. And I think most importantly, it's about us as parents walking the walk, modeling those good financial habits ourselves.
It always comes back to leading by example.
Always.
It sounds like this whole Millionaire Next Door thing, it's about more than just, well, money, isn't it?
It really is. It's about values. It's about finding fulfillment in things that are, more meaningful than just buying a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
The book even talks about this guy, Mr. Allen. He's a millionaire, content as can be, loves simple pleasures, doesn't need to impress anyone.
It's inspiring, isn't it? It kind of makes you rethink what it really means to be successful.
Definitely. Maybe true wealth, it's not about the size of your bank account, but about aligning your spending with your values, finding contentment and simplicity, and living a life that's, truly fulfilling.
Well said. It's been fascinating diving into The Millionaire Next Door with you today. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that building wealth, it's not about some magic formula or, getting lucky. It's about making smart choices, being disciplined, and playing that long game. And that's something anyone can do. If you haven't already, I highly recommend checking out The Millionaire Next Door. It's full of insights that can really change the way you think about wealth and success. Until next time, keep those great questions coming and keep exploring.